Nobody moved. 41 people inside Eddie's American Diner on Bedford Avenue, London, on a Tuesday afternoon in March 1982, and not one of them breathed. Coffee cups sat untouched, forks frozen mid-air. A man near the window had been reaching for the salt shaker when it happened, and his arm just stopped. Like the whole room had been pressed into pause by an invisible hand. Because there was a girl on the counter stool, and she was singing. She hadn't announced it, hadn't asked permission. She just came out from the back during her break with a battered acoustic guitar, sat down like she'd done it 100 times, and started playing. The song she chose was Let It Be, the most famous song in the world. She played the opening chords slowly, like she was handling something fragile. And then she opened her mouth, and the room just went. Nobody shushed anyone. Nobody made a decision to be quiet. It happened the way silence happens when something real enters a space, all at once, without warning. The kitchen noise faded. The street sounds faded. The only thing left was her voice, grooving through the words like she had written them herself. She had her eyes closed. She had no idea anyone was listening. She was wrong about all of it. Because at that exact moment, the front door swung open. A rush of cold March air swept through the diner. A man in a dark navy jacket stepped inside and stopped. He heard her voice before he saw anything, landing on the words, "When the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me." And something crossed his face that nobody in that room could name. Not surprise, not celebrity warmth, something older, something private, something that belonged to a 14-year-old boy in Liverpool the morning his mother died. For a moment, no one moved. But that moment didn't start there. To understand what happened in the next 15 minutes, and why no one who was there ever forgot it, you have to go back. Subscribe now, because what Paul McCartney did next is the part that will follow you home. London in March 1982 was still grieving. 16 months earlier, on a cold December night in New York City, John Lennon had been shot dead outside his apartment building. The wound hadn't closed. It hadn't even scabbed over. Beatlemania was history, but the music had never left. It lived in jukeboxes, in school hallways, in the fingers of a generation that grew up believing those 4 boys from Liverpool had somehow put the whole broken world into words. And now one of them was gone, and the rest of the world was still trying to understand what that meant. Paul McCartney was 39 years old that March, quietly rebuilding. Wings had dissolved the year before, and Paul was doing what Paul had always done after a collapse. He kept working, kept writing. Moved through London the way he'd learned to move through every city, carefully, through side streets and back doors, present but invisible. He knew which restaurants were safe, which faces could be trusted. He had spent 20 years learning how to be the most famous musician on earth and still find 10 minutes of quiet. The girl had no such problem. Nobody knew her name. Claire Donahue was 24 years old, originally from Cork, Ireland. She had moved to London at 19 with a second-hand Yamaha guitar and the kind of stubborn optimism that only survives before rent becomes real. She'd been waitressing at Eddie's Diner for 2 years. Good with regulars, fast with orders, the kind of person who made a room warmer without trying. On Thursday nights, she sang at the Half Moon pub in Putney. 12 people on a slow night, 15 on a good one. She had been thinking about quitting. Not the singing, never the singing, but London, the dream. 2 years in and nothing had shifted. No callbacks, no connections. Her father's letters from Cork arrived every month, gentle and careful, never saying "come home," but meaning it. She had given herself until summer. She didn't know that summer had already arrived early. The lunch rush had pulled back by 2:15 p.m. 3 tables still occupied. 2 regulars nursing tea at the counter. Claire's manager, Gordon, a stout Scotsman who ran the diner like a ship and tolerated exactly zero nonsense, had disappeared into the back to do inventory. The jukebox had run out of coins. The kitchen had settled into that low, comfortable hum that only happens when the hard part of the day is done. Claire had 20 minutes. She went to the back, came out with the Yamaha, and sat down on the end stool near the window, the one that caught the afternoon light best. The guitar was beat up, a 1970s FG 180 with a crack along the shoulder held together with wood glue and stubbornness. Her father had bought it second-hand in Cork in 1971 for £11. It was the first thing she had packed when she left for London. It was the last thing she would ever leave behind. She didn't think about what to play. Her fingers just found the opening chords of Let It Be, the way they always did when she needed to remember why she was still here. It was the song she'd learned first, the one her father hummed on Sunday mornings in the kitchen, the one she played on Thursday nights when the crowd was thin and the doubt was loud. It wasn't a performance, it was a conversation she was having with herself. The two regulars at the counter turned first. Then a woman at the corner booth looked up from her newspaper. Then the young couple by the door stopped talking. Nobody announced the silence. It just arrived, the way it always does when something honest walks into a room. Claire kept her eyes closed. Her Cork accent softened the vowels in a way that made the song sound ancient and new at the same time. When she reached the second verse, 3 people in that room felt something tighten in their chests before they understood why. She never heard the bell above the door. Paul McCartney had not planned to stop at Eddie's. He had a meeting that afternoon near Covent Garden that ended 40 minutes early, and Eddie's was 3 blocks away, and Gordon had been a passing acquaintance for years. The kind of easy, uncomplicated friendship that famous people protect because it asks nothing from them. Paul wanted coffee, wanted 10 minutes off the street. He pushed the door open, let it swing behind him, and stopped. The cold air came in with him. The bell rang above the door. And every person in the room held their breath, not because of who had just walked in, but because they were terrified the girl would hear it, terrified she would stop. She didn't stop. She didn't hear it. She was somewhere else entirely. Paul stood in the doorway and listened. He had written Let It Be in 1968, the worst year the Beatles ever had. The lawsuits, the arguments, the slow, grinding dissolution of everything they had built together. He had been exhausted and lost, and one night he dreamed about his mother Mary, who had died of cancer when Paul was 14. In the dream, she came to him quietly and said the only thing that ever helped: let it be. He woke up and wrote the song before breakfast. He had sung it 1,000 times since, on stadium stages, in recording studios, in sound checks in empty arenas at 7 in the morning. He knew every corner of it. He had never heard it like this. The girl wasn't performing it. She was living inside it. There was no distance between her and the words, no technique, no presentation, no awareness of being heard. Just a young woman with her eyes closed, singing a song about surrender to an empty diner on a Tuesday afternoon. One of the regulars recognised Paul first. His mouth opened. Paul put one finger to his lips without looking at him. The man nodded and didn't move. Nobody moved. When Claire played the final chord and opened her eyes, every face in the room was already waiting for her. Claire saw him, and the guitar nearly left her hands. She grabbed it at the last second, both arms wrapping around the body like she was catching something that couldn't be replaced, because it couldn't. Her face went the particular white that only happens when the mind refuses to process what the eyes are clearly seeing. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Paul crossed the diner slowly and pulled out the counter stool beside her. Not a booth, not a table across the room. Right there, 2 feet away, like any ordinary person sitting down for coffee. Gordon had appeared from the back, taken one look, and made a movement toward them. Paul shook his head once. Gordon retreated. The other customers stayed exactly where they were, collective breath held, pretending very hard to look at anything else. Paul spoke first, quietly, no performance in it. "How long have you been playing?" Claire swallowed. "Since I was 8. My father taught me." "Where do you sing?" "Thursday nights. A pub in Putney. The Half Moon." She paused. "Maybe 15 people." Paul nodded, like 15 people meant something real. Then he asked the question that undid her completely. He asked why that song? Why Let It Be? And Claire, still shaking, said something she hadn't planned to say out loud to anyone, let alone to him. She said, "Because I play it when I'm trying to remind myself not to give up." Paul was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's why I wrote it." Nobody in the room breathed. He asked her to play something she had written herself. She hesitated. 3 originals, all unfinished, none of them ever heard by another living person. He waited with the patience of a man who understood exactly what he was asking. She played one. 40 seconds. A melody that moved in a direction nobody expected. When she stopped, Paul said, "The bridge wants to go somewhere. You're holding it back. Let it go." She played it again. She let it go. The melody opened like a door that had always been unlocked. Paul reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain white card. He slid it across the counter without ceremony. No speech, no dramatic pause, just a card with a handwritten number on the back, and 4 words spoken quietly enough that only Claire could hear them. "Call Monday. Ask for Richard." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and looked at her one final time. "The bridge deserves to go somewhere," he said. Then he walked to the door, stepped back out into the cold March street, and was gone. The diner stayed silent for a full 10 seconds after the door closed. Then everyone started talking at once. Claire sat on the stool and didn't move. She held the card in both hands and stared at it the way people stare at things they are afraid to believe are real. Gordon came out from the back, looked at her face, and quietly brought her a cup of tea. She didn't touch it. She was still sitting there when the next shift arrived 20 minutes later. She called Monday morning, misdialed twice. When she finally got through and said Paul McCartney's name, the man on the other end, Richard, the studio manager at Air Studios on Oxford Street, paused for exactly 3 seconds. Then he said, "Monday at 10. Bring the guitar." She sat down on her kitchen floor and cried for 20 minutes. Then she called her father in Cork. He listened to the whole story without interrupting. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. Then Seamus Donahue said the thing fathers say when they have been waiting years to be proven right. "I knew," he said softly. "I always knew." Air Studios was nothing like the Half Moon in Putney. The ceilings were high, the piano was in tune. 2 session musicians arrived and set up without introduction. Paul was not there, but he had left instructions. They recorded for 4 hours, not 2. When Claire finally walked out onto Oxford Street, she was carrying a tape with a label written in handwriting she already recognised. It said 3 words, "Let It Go." Claire Donahue never became a household name. She signed with a small independent label by the end of 1982. Her first EP came out the following spring. Music press called her voice devastating in its quietness. She toured small venues across the UK and Ireland, recorded 3 albums through the 1980s, earned songwriting credits on other artists' records, built a life made entirely of music. It wasn't a stadium career. It wasn't fame in the way the world usually measures it. But it was real, and it was hers. And it had started on a Tuesday afternoon when she sat down on a diner stool with her eyes closed and played a song because she needed to remind herself not to give up. Her father flew over for the Dublin show in 1984. She played Let It Be as the encore. Seamus Donahue stood in the third row and cried without covering his face. She saw him from the stage and nearly lost the words. She didn't. She slowed down instead, the way you slow down when something matters too much to rush. He died in 2001. On his bedside table, worn smooth from handling, was a tape of her first EP. The last song on side 1 was the one with the bridge, the unfinished thing she had played for 40 seconds in a London diner 19 years before. He had listened to it every night for nearly 2 decades. The bridge went exactly where it wanted. He had known it would. In 2004, a journalist tracked Claire down while researching a piece on Air Studios. She agreed to talk. She told the story exactly as it happened. The break, the song, the door, the 40 seconds Paul stood in the doorway without moving, the card across the counter. She said, "He didn't do it for headlines. He just refused to walk past something real." The journalist reached Paul's representatives for comment. His response came back in one sentence. "I remember the song." The cracked Yamaha still sits in Claire's living room in Dublin. She doesn't play it much anymore. She doesn't need to. The bridge already went where it wanted. That was always the whole point. If someone once believed in you before you believed in yourself, their name belongs in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe. We tell the stories that never made headlines, but changed everything.